Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. And if you had a story that you could tell a boy of, say, 14 and he'd listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys and young men in the modern world. This series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. For our podcast today, I'm joined by Matt and Robyn Cronin. I want to start today by saying that we are headed into some difficult territory. Like many people, I followed the story in 2016 of Pat Cronin, who was taken too young. He was only 19 when, after playing football with his brother, he went out for a few drinks. After a brawl started outside the pub, Pat intervened to help a friend, and he was punched from behind. Pat stayed on his feet, checking that his friends were okay. But later he developed symptoms, became unconscious and was admitted to hospital. 2 days later, he was gone with the life support being turned off. Pat's story has become galvanising for many of us who are concerned about violence in the community and its devastating impact. The Cronin Foundation is committed to ending the coward's punch. Matt and Robyn Cronin, it must be so hard to hear that read out, and I'm so sorry this is where we are. And how have you managed to deal with the huge grief over the last few years for you?
Yeah, I think as I was just listening to you read that out, Ray, and as you said, I think the words come off our website. So we live and breathe this every day, but to hear actually someone reading that out again, it's like a news story almost. And it, again, just takes your breath away every time we think about it, to be honest. So, it's 6 years now, and I don't know that it gets any easier any day. So what would you say, Robyn?
No, certainly not easier. Sometimes harder. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's because it's longer since we've seen him, and this is for our forever now. Our forever's without him. So, and that's just really hard. You wonder what he'd be doing, what he'd be up to now. All the time.
Yeah, that daily loss and finding a way of having to carry it and to manage it within yourselves would be it is every parent's worst nightmare. And as we unpack things today, looking at it, that it's it's preventable, and as a community we do need to really change our attitudes around violence, about how it's, I guess, propagated amongst the community. It's seen as a way of it's condoned in some ways, explicitly, implicitly, in lots of different ways. And as we look at your work and we think about the coward's punch, and the simple fact that 127 people, again referring to your website, are killed by coward's punches between 2000 and 2016. I mean, it's an extraordinarily high number.
Yeah, it's you work out the stats on that, and it's about one a month. Which is horrendous when you think about it. And this is just the deaths that are reported.
Yeah.
Statistically, the number is significantly higher in terms of how many coward punch attacks happen. It's only the deaths that get reported. The ones that aren't reported are, young fellas like James McCready Bryan, who is, I think 12 years plus a coward punch victim, and he's living with it with an acquired brain injury. In a care facility for the rest of his life. So they're the untold statistics, ones that have got those acquired brain injuries. But the near misses, the people who have been punched, they maybe went to hospital, they walked out of hospital, but they're living with the mental demons that follow them forever, thinking, hey, someone could just come up behind them. They're constantly looking over their shoulder. So they're the untold statistics, if you like. So it's cases like Pat's and many other prominent cases that we're all aware of. But yeah, there's so many others.
Yeah, and with the work in the foundation, can you tell us a little bit about the inception around that? You know, obviously with coming out of the tremendous loss and the tremendous grief, has it been something that's been able to, I guess, start to create meaning back in your lives about something, you know, taking action and look, it's this terrible things happen, but, you know, we can now take steps to start to create a culture where this doesn't happen any longer. Was it long after his passing that you started to get the idea for a foundation, or?
No, it was in the following days, very, very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll let Matt tell you a little bit more about how it started, but I always answer that question just by saying that Pat's life just matters too much to just let it have stopped there. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard at times dealing with the foundation and doing things for the foundation. It's hard because it is upsetting, but Pat just matters. So we have to make this difference. We have to do the work that we're doing for us and for Pat.
Yeah. So, I mean, as Robyn said there, Ray, it was only probably the day after we came home from hospital, we opened the doors to our house, and we were flooded with support from our community, our family, our friends. We've always been heavily involved in the community, you know, whether it be through the kids' kinder or primary school, you know, junior footy club, senior footy club. So we've always been people that I guess haven't just stood back and waited for others to do things. And, you know, it was on our back veranda. I'm looking at it at the moment. I can almost picture the spot where I was standing when one of our mates said, we've got to do something about this. And it became a real galvanising moment, I guess, for us. But even more so, not just for us, but for our network of friends and community. You know, it was a horrendous thing for us to be going through, but I think in taking some sort of positive action there, and, you know, one of the things that I will say with the foundation is that, you know, we are dealing with an incredibly negative situation, but we're trying to do it in an empowering and optimistic way, which might seem really crazy to think that, but, you know, our number one intention of the foundation is to honour Pat with everything we do. As Robyn said, Pat's life is too important to us. Yeah. We know we can't bring him back, but I think in a selfish way, I want the world to be a better place so that Emma and Lucas, you know, Pat's sister and brother, that they're safe, right? Yeah. And then by extension, you know, if we can make the world safer for them, and then for, you know, Pat's many cousins and friends and family, et cetera, by extension, we can make the world a better place. And we're optimistic about that we can make a change. This was a sense that it shouldn't have happened. Sorry, there's our dogs barking in the background.
That's all
good. We're a normal family. You know, as I said, you know, we have two dogs that keep us incredible company. So I think, you know, in coming back to that, it is about being optimistic and actually saying that we can make a difference. Yep.
When we look at the attitudes, and embedded in so much of this, and a lot of the work the listeners of Understanding Boys would know, we talk a lot about, you know, being a boy, being a young male adolescent, and you know, then growing into adulthood. And violence is very much sort of part of the drinking water. You know, I was reviewing your website and as part of this preparation for our chat today, and I encourage our listeners to get on, have a look, find out how they can sponsor, how they can get a facilitator to come out and spread the word around this. But one of the things that is quite, I guess, confronting to look at is in this context is about some of the statistics around how kids are seeing violence. You know, 21% of students believe that fighting is a way to have fun.
Yeah.
You know, 23% like to watch fights, not in the movies, but they like to watch fights at school. You know, 1 in 4 believing that things can be solved by force. Most people having seen a real life physical fight. and the belief around, violence as an act to defend yourself. I mean, these are pretty compelling, and pretty, I guess, rock solid things to change around attitudes to violence with kids.
Yep. Yeah. Look, I mean, the stats are, they're quite damning, really. That all those numbers that you were just referring to there, Ray, we started surveying only earlier this year. We started recording, in fact, sending out a survey before we do a presentation, and then also after we do a presentation. And I guess the pleasing thing is, as you say, some of those stats where so many people have seen fights, they've seen it as some of them see it as a way of having fun. The pleasing thing is that the post-survey results that we're now starting to see. So we do a survey before the presentation and one afterwards. And by sharing Pat's story, we're actually seeing those dials move.
Yeah, that's great.
So particularly in terms of the attitudes, in terms of whether they're likely to use violence, to solve a problem. So it's very early days in terms of the statistics, and I guess this is really where we really want to concentrate with our efforts. So we want to empower young people to make wise decisions. Hence we use this phrase of be wise.
Yeah.
The symbol of our foundation is an owl.
It's the owl,
and the owl was drawn by Pat, so it has absolutely it has personal significance to us. We didn't know that he'd drawn that owl.
Okay.
And yet, in the days after he passed away, a group of his mates had these T-shirts made for us and for them with the owl on the back. And it was their way of remembering Pat, and it just resonated with us. Robyn's always liked owls, and the fact that Pat drew this owl, it's just made it very personal for us. But he's about being wise like the owl. The old saying, the wise owl. So if we can help kids, young people to make those wise decisions, then we often talk in our presentations about the night that Pat was hit. He had a choice that night. He could have gone in and thrown a punch because his mate was being attacked, but he made his decision was to go in and grab him and pull him away from danger. The coward who killed Pat had the same choice, yet he chose to go in and throw a cowardly punch. And yet this was a man who was 32, I think, at the time. He had a child of his own. He was 6'4", probably 120 kilos. Pat was maybe 6'1", maybe 75 kilos. So in no way was it ever going to be a fair fight, if you want to say that. And the fact that he hit Pat from behind, where Pat had no possible chance of defending himself, was even more cowardly, makes it that absolute coward punch.
Well, not only from behind, but Patrick had his hands on his friend. There was no chance. No chance.
No. Yeah. So, when we, initially we didn't see the CCTV footage. We chose not to view it until the day of the court. And, that was many months after, 18 months after Pat died. But in looking at that vision, it is sickening. But we're both so incredibly proud of what Pat did that night, in that sadly he did exactly what we told him to do, which is if your friends are in trouble, you help them out.
Yeah.
Not by throwing a punch, just grab them and drag them away from trouble. Unfortunately, that night, no one had Pat's back, and the coward, as I said, took the opportunity to throw a punch in the worst possible way. Pat was extremely unlucky. We know that.
Yeah.
But as you said in that opening bit, Pat wasn't knocked out. He didn't hit the ground. He sort of rode the bump, if you like, as he would have done playing footy. And he walked away, and then he continued to gather his mates even after that happened, until the point where they walked home to his friend's place.
I think almost that, it's incredibly difficult in that footage to see him punched, but there's a bit that almost upsets me even more. A little bit later, when everything's kind of settled down, he's just sitting on at one of the tables at the venue, and he's talking to his friends, and he just motions, he puts his fist to his head and is indicating that he's been hit.
Yeah.
And that little bit kind of almost breaks my heart more than the rest of it in a way. He knew. Maybe a quicker reaction could have changed something, but he didn't know how bad it was going to turn out. So
Yeah, but I think, for us, education is the key. And, whilst, we've got the foundation there in our messages, we're all about trying to get out and getting this message out, sharing Pat's story with young people. And, so a lot of our work is done in secondary schools, and we do a lot of work in sporting clubs, community groups as well. Like last year, for example, I think we even in a COVID year, we did 137 presentations.
It's amazing.
Which was, and 60 of those were online in the end.
Yeah.
But the thing that's been quite incredible, Ray, is that here we've finally got a year where we're unencumbered. And so far this year, we actually have 348 bookings, and we're not even at the end of term 2.
That's incredible.
So, which it really is. And, sadly, I think it is the schools realise that they need our help.
Yeah.
Because they are seeing, those stats that you read out before. They're from students. They're from secondary school students. They're not from, the skate park. They're from kids who go to school in Victoria.
Yeah.
So there's some frightening stats there. So we've got to train them. We use the analogy of drink drive bloody idiot. Seatbelts. I grew up, in the early 70s where you didn't have to wear a seatbelt. These days we have laws that say you wear a seatbelt in the car. Not everyone does, but most people do. And our road toll is significantly less as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
So you take that similar sort of message, and that's been generational change, and you say, well, how can we accelerate that generational change? So we need to teach young people these skills. Because, yes, we go and tell a story, and that presentation might go for 45 minutes to an hour, but this is where we then need to embed the learning and continue. So, programs like we're talking with you today is a great way, obviously, of continuing that message to say, how do we make, give young people the skills to be able to deal with these sorts of confrontations that will happen. There will be someone might bump into you at a party or if you're a bit older at a pub or a club, but it's what you do next is absolutely within your control. So, it is senseless for someone to throw a coward punch. So we talk about consequences, for the offender, because the moment that punch gets thrown, total control of what happens next is lost. The person who throws that punch, who might think that they're being powerful in that moment, they in fact actually lose all power the moment that punch leaves their fist, if you like, because what happens next, we don't know. As I said, Pat was extremely unlucky. He was hit in the temple, the thinnest part of the skull. It didn't knock him out, as I say, but that punch was enough to fracture his skull.
Yeah.
And yet there wasn't a mark on him to see. It was only under X-ray and scans that fracture was able to be seen, which caused the bleed on his brain. So, we talk about even violence in the school, in a school setting. Let's just say there's a bit of push and shove in a schoolyard. What we know in a school setting, there are so many hard surfaces.
Yeah.
Whether it be the corner of a building, or if it's in the bathroom, it could be the hand basin or the toilet or the urinal. It could be anywhere, a bench. Someone, you happen to have an act of violence that pushes someone back. They trip over, not your fault, but they trip over something. Next thing you know, they hit their head on a hard surface. And what happens next is totally out of their control. So
that's such a key point, Matt. And just as you're speaking, when you said, when you make the punch, you lose control. Because I think that's almost, for a lot of kids, and I teach a lot of boys like that they're always pushing up against the boundary. They want to know where the boundary is, so they're so used to, you see little kids lining up at school and they're kind of literally jostling to work out where the boundary is. They'll push up against boundaries and rules. And yet in this instance, they're actually pushing, what they're pushing up against, they take that punch, they then don't know what's going to happen after that. I mean, it's a very powerful way to reframe the act of violence, which for a lot of kids, I think, and it's reinforced by so much of our movies. And we had football players recently getting into a punch on in a public, in a well-to-do restaurant here in Melbourne. But you're actually losing control at that moment of your destiny and outcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think they're all great. Sadly, we see too many examples of this that we can highlight, as you say, for those prominent things like the AFL scenario that just happened recently. This time last year we were talking about, a couple of Richmond players who went out and, again, they chose violence as their way to, deal with a situation. Violence is never the answer. And, that's the bits that we need to, get into the heads of our young people so that they do make those wise decisions. They're confronted with this. So what do they do next? That's what we have to teach. So, and it's not about just an hour's lesson, let's say an hour presentation, because I can tell you, the reaction we get from every time we do a presentation is absolutely the same. It is stunned silence. People's breath is taken away. The hankies come out, the tissues come out, etc. But it resonates with young people, when we were always concerned, did Pat do something silly that night? Did he get caught up in something that, wasn't in his nature? But, that was vindicated through the CCTV, which shows, in fact, that Pat did nothing other than try to gather his friends together. It was mentioned in the court process that Pat was a shining light. And in fact, the person who killed him should have taken the lead from the younger person and followed his example by pulling his mate away rather than adding fuel to the fire. So, as I said, we can be incredibly proud of Pat, but I think what then resonates, Ray, with our audiences is, and this is boys and girls, okay? It's not just the boys, but what resonates is that they look at they look at the images of Pat and they say, gee, this could have been me. This could have been my brother. This could have been my boyfriend. This could have been my teammate, my schoolmate. And, because Pat, he was just that normal kid from suburbia.
Another thing that maybe not a lot of people know is that the fight went for approximately 10 minutes, maybe 10 or so minutes. And Pat was punched really late into that. He was punched at about the 9-minute mark. And the fight on several occasions nearly dispersed. But there was a group of the coward who punched Pat. There was a group of his friends that kept coming back in. They kept coming back in and starting it up again and starting it up. And there's another opportunity lost that this didn't need to happen because they didn't need to do that either. So we really, really encourage people to make wise decisions, but also to help their friends make wise decisions. And if they know somebody that does act a bit like that, well, then don't encourage them, stop them, call them out on it, and don't let it keep happening.
Yeah, and look, there, I guess the side shoot to that story, and it perhaps didn't get the publicity that it should have done, but only 2 weeks ago, the last of those people who Robyn mentioned who were in the fight went to court. 6 years after Pat died, they actually had a day in court. And out of the 7, 6 of them were ultimately found guilty. Now, 2 or 3 of them, I think, ended up with diversion orders, which doesn't follow them effectively. It's almost like a good behaviour bond. So they won't have a criminal record as such. But three of the remaining 6 have got convictions, and that conviction will follow them forever. So they now have a criminal record. In fact, 2 of them have additional criminal records because 2 of them already had criminal records for violence. And amazingly, the magistrate chose not to send them to jail. They got slapped. One of them got hit with a fine of $2,000 and the other one got a $3,000 fine. These are people who had previously been dealt with within the court system, and yet that was the so-called punishment. So, do they? Some people don't learn from their behaviours. I hope the ones that had the diversion will learn. I hope that they all learn from their behaviours, the outcomes. But, I think it really highlights the fact that each of these people who was charged were charged off CCTV, not through anyone,
not through a witness or.
Correct. So
right.
no one made a complaint. The police just in doing their investigation of Pat's case realised that there was a lot of people that contributed to this whole scenario. So each and every one of these people. So look, we even said it when it came to the court. It didn't matter what sentence the killer was given.
Yeah,
it was never going to be enough. So the number one thing that we needed to see through that process was a guilty verdict.
Yeah.
And we got that on the third day of the trial when he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. When he looked at when the lawyer looked in the whites of the eyes of the jury after they played the CCTV vision and saw half the jury crying, I think they realised pretty quickly that they were not going to win this court case. So they changed their plea to from not guilty to guilty after 18 months of being adamant that he had nothing to do with it. The CCTV
not that he had nothing to do with it, but all the excuses in the world.
Yeah,
he wasn't aiming for him. He
wasn't his fault.
It wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
All manner of things. Tried to even imply that Pat might have hit his head that day at footy, and that might have been what killed him. So, every excuse possible.
Yeah. So anyway, we got a guilty verdict, and he ultimately said that he did it. So our only solace, for the listeners there, Ray, he was sentenced to 8 years in jail with a 5-year minimum, and that 5 years is coming up in the next few months.
Right.
So he may be paroled. We don't know. We have to wait and see, but we have no control over that. So, I think our only solace that we took away from that process was that we did get a guilty verdict, which says to us that we know that someone did this to Pat. Because if he had been found not guilty, we'd be still scratching our heads to say what happened to Pat. So the fact that we got a guilty verdict is that he needs to then live with that for the rest of his life. That's his life sentence. We've got a life sentence. Pat was given a life sentence that night. We have to live with our lives without Pat in our lives. He should be coming. Our daughter Emma got engaged earlier this year, which was just absolutely magnificent. And Pat should be at the wedding, in February next year. But there'll be an empty seat at our table again. So that's what we've got to live with. Emma's got to live with the fact that her baby brother won't be at her wedding. So many of these moments are always bittersweet for us, that we do have some good moments in our lives, and we'll never forget that. And we always make Pat a part of what we do. Mm-hmm. There's always a presence with him, but there's always that empty seat at the same time.
Yeah. And from what you're describing, as these events are coming up, whether they're wonderful events like, the upcoming marriage of your daughter, or, the terrible events like going through the system of judgments that it must stir everything up again and make it really difficult to find peace, in that.
Yeah, peace is not a word that I often feel. And I think sometimes I stay in my sadness about Pat because that's now the connection that I have to him.
Right.
And it's really hard to connect him into the happy things. And I don't know if I've described that really well, but it's almost, I almost feel better when I'm sitting there feeling a bit sad about Pat, because I feel that he's still with me.
Yeah. Wow.
But I really have to learn how to bring him into the happy times much, much better. And that's not something that I've really learned that well, even in 6 years. So, it's really tough.
When we look at the, we're talking about some of these steps to violence prevention and the awareness and the consequences of violence, and I'm referring to the model from the foundation, empowering action. When I looked at it and I saw about the taking control, one of the questions I had, which I think you've answered, was, is this mostly a male issue? in enacted violence, and I imagine that statistically there'd be at least more reported violence in this way. But then we know, and generally speaking, it seems to be mostly, in the male domain, particularly in the domestic violence space. That statistic also holds true. What are some of your thoughts, or what have you learned about, giving advice around, managing anger? I mean, if I was a parent and I was listening, my boy gets really head up sometimes, and I've seen him act out, and I've seen him express himself violently, and, he punched the wall the other day, and I'm worried that what are some of the things that we can offer to people in that third step about taking control and managing anger?
There's just one thing I want to say first about that. And you mentioned, in the first part of this question about it being mostly a male thing, but we're really aware that girls have a big part to play in that. We want girls to not expect their boyfriends or think it's good or macho of their boyfriends to defend them in that sort of a way, and not to look for that sort of situation. I think the one that Matt spoke about earlier about the Richmond players last year, that was because somebody had said something to one of their girlfriends. Now, not only do girls not need to be defended in that way, if a girl does think she wants to be, then she's got to learn too that that's not, there's nothing macho about that. There's nothing loving or defensive about that. The better thing to do would be to just walk away with her, So we really believe that girls have a part to play, maybe in their expectations of their partners. We also think that girls have a big part to play just by maybe being a little bit more aware of a situation and saying, hey, look, it's really not very nice here. Let's just go, because sometimes you just get a vibe that a place just isn't things just might not turn out right. And we've been told that by people we know that were at the Winding Mile the night Pat was killed. There was just a vibe. The minute they were there, it's like there was something going on. So, yes, we think girls have a big part to play as well, but boys too.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And look, I think an extension of, the female involvement is the one that probably got the most publicity early this year was Will Smith.
Yeah.
Again, for a man who makes a living out of using his words, it was quite ridiculous, in fact, what he did that night.
Yeah.
And how much better. In fact, I think probably one of our most popular posts that we put up on social media this year was, in fact, I was sitting on the couch and I got a message from a teacher who actually was thanking us for the work that we did at the school that day. And I thought, how good's this? So I'm, that's fantastic. But then, her post went on to say, but, right, I've just got home and watched the news and saw Will Smith do what he did. And she thought, wow, this is, it, she then started to question, what chance have we got? And you've got prominent people like Will Smith doing what he did. And, so, I think the post went something along the lines of just what a wasted opportunity it was for Will Smith. That he could have spoken to his wife at the time and said, how do you feel about that? And if, and it wasn't about, taking control or anything like that, but it's basically empowering her to say, how do you feel? Then she could make the decision to say, well, actually, I'm not happy about that. So how much better would it have been if they had walked out arm in arm out of the theatre that night without saying a word? And because the media would have followed them, wouldn't they? And said, what was that all about? And great opportunity where they could have used that for so much better than what it became. So, yeah. Now, I mean, again, another wise decision, isn't it? So in the heat of the moment, it's hard to make those decisions. So, so coming back to your question there, Ray, about taking control and managing anger. We do talk about anger when we do our presentations, and the fact is that anger takes many different forms. While I'm sitting here talking to you rationally at the moment, again, always in the pit of my stomach is anger about what happened to Pat.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be sitting here talking about what happened to our son 6 years ago. So for me, it's just about, I guess, channeling the energy, in a positive way. If you are in that that moment where someone knocks a drink out of your hand or bumps into you in a line, how do you control that? So, you know, we want to give the kids...
Which really isn't worth being angry about.
That's right, exactly. So, yeah, context, I guess, is a big part of our lives now. We say, let's put it into context. You know, people said, what did you feel about the court situation the other week, you know, with these guys charged with a fray?
Yeah.
And I said, look, if you put it into context compared to what happened to us 6 years ago, it's nothing.
Mm.
You know, so context is one thing, but it's not always easy to do that in the heat of the moment. So, you know, one of our presenters, Alan, he's out of the security industry, you know, and Alan, you know, used to train bouncers. So, and again, you know, one of those first steps, you know, taking control is just to breathe.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Just take a deep breath. And again, I can't profess to be an expert on what happens here, but, you know, physiologically, when you breathe, you go from that fight and flight mode, if you like. You know, it actually does something to your brain. So there is absolute benefit in taking a deep breath, because it's buying you time. You know, you're not reacting. You're not just lashing out. So, you know, another saying that we use in the foundation, that if you know, we believe that violence is a learned behaviour. So if violence is a learned behaviour, then in fact the opposite then also applies, which is being anti-violent is also a learned behaviour. Yeah. So, you know, the sooner we can get this sort of training, if you like, into schools, the better. So, you know, again, a little bit of a plug for the foundation. Sure, we have our 1 hour presentations that we do at schools, but, you know, we've just launched our e-learning modules. So, and there's 5 online modules that schools can effectively subscribe to. Yeah. And that then takes it out of that presentation moment where students can, at their own pace, you know, just work through these 5 modules. And again, it just embeds the learning we're talking about.
You've also got an app as well. Are you able to share how the app works and what sort of function? Because I suspect in that moment where, you know, one of the other things I was just going to comment on the breathing. Again, I'm certainly not an expert in this field, but, you know, I have been told and have observed in myself that breathing in for, say, a 4 count and breathing out for a 6 count, like making the out breath and really expelling the oxygen. I don't know why physiologically it seems to have an effect, but it certainly does seem to have a calming effect, and whether or not it's just that it forces us to really concentrate on our breathing and enables us to start to have other thoughts, just a slow down and all those things can work. But how does the app work?
Yeah, so look, the app was an idea that we came up with some time ago, which is to say, how do we stay in the hearts and the minds of, you know, young people, let's say. Yeah, so with the app, it uses this geofencing technology, which, you know, puts a virtual fence around a venue. So like the MCG, you walk up to the steps of the MCG, you'll get a little message on your phone. And as we know, all young people, the phone's never more than, you know, a foot from their hand, if you like. So the message will say something like, you know, looks like you're heading out to the MCG, have a great time and remember to look after your mates. So, but not only have we got that for, say, our younger audience, you know, we've got all of the sporting venues around Melbourne covered at the moment, but we've also covered all the nightclub areas such as King Street, Chapel Street, Brunswick Street, Crown, etc. So anywhere where we know that there's a high volume of young people gathered of an evening, where sadly this is where this sort of conflict happens. So same sort of deal. Someone's walking out, you know, walking up to King Street, for example, and they'll just get that little message. So we're sort of hoping that it'll be like a little subliminal tap on the shoulder, so that maybe later in the night when something might go down, that just maybe that message about being wise and, you know, looking after yourself, looking after your mates, that might just stick with the person on that night and help guide them to make the wise decision when those things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the things that's in common with all of those areas is the availability of alcohol and other drugs, illicit and otherwise, that would no doubt scramble your ability to be wise and, you know, may stop up that passage to, you know, of thinking and having that moment of clarity, and may also, you know, stifle some of your emotional inhibition where you might also, make a really, really poor decision.
Yep. For sure.
Well.
Yep.
Matt and Robyn, it's been a massive insight, into your world and your work, and really difficult. I'm very grateful to you both for actually to share this, and I can imagine how it's stirring and uncomfortable it is, and the anger and frustration and all of those things that are present in this. But I'm also really conscious as I'm listening about the tremendous power of good work that's going on, and also I think for many of us who are concerned about violence in the community, that the work that you're doing, the impact that you're having across hundreds and hundreds of schools and into our community as well is actually inspirational for us. So I do really want to thank you for that, and thank you both for your sharing. And we have 2 questions that we ask all of our guests, and I'm hoping I can ask those to you today. The first one is, what is it to be a good man these days?
Well, I think probably the main thing that I would be looking for is just respect. Yeah. Just respect everyone around you. You don't have to like everyone. You don't have to be everyone's friend. But just respect that everybody's got it right to be or to do, and just treat them the way you want to be treated. Just don't be stupid. Just respect everybody's right to be there, and just if you respect, then I think you won't get caught up in doing stupid things like that.
We've had 3 storybooks written for primary school age children, Ray, and you can find all the details of our storybooks on the website. But there's a beautiful turn of phrase that was used in those storybooks, which in fact we use more broadly with the foundation now, and that is: be wise, think carefully, act kindly. Now, I think if they're pretty good definitions for a good man, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think, because if we all lived our life that way, be wise, think carefully, act kindly, well, no one's ever going to throw a coward punch. So I think that the author Maureen Hyland, who's a good friend of ours, and she taught at Pat's primary school before he was there, but yeah, she just absolutely nailed that, I think, with that phrase. Yep.
Yeah. Be wise, think carefully, act kindly.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep.
And our final question is, if you had a story that you could share with a 14-year-old and he'd listen, what would the story be?
You know what? It would be a story about a young kid called Pat Cronin, and it's the saddest story that you're ever going to hear, but it's the most powerful story you'll also ever hear. And you think, would you want to swap spots with Pat? No. So let's put an end to the cow punch, and hopefully Pat's story is the last that we ever have to share like this. That's our aim. We absolutely believe that we can end the cow punch. One by one, we're stopping people, we're stopping these acts of violence. Let's go for 100%.
Robyn and Matt, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
The Cronin Foundation is committed to ending the coward's punch. But I really encourage you to have a look at their website. There's lots of ways that you can support the work that they're doing, which is really shining a light on one of the most difficult and uncomfortable realities of our culture today, and that is about violence. We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.